You're listening to Remotely One, a podcast that educates, entertains, and inspires you to take your life back from the office commute. I'm Rick, a former beer rep who left the warehouse to become a voice actor and digital creator.
And I'm Kaleem, a remote work advocate and consultant. We're going to speak with some of the top professionals who have managed to avoid the commute as they share stories from the most inspiring to the most comical, all while working remotely.
Man, this sounds awesome. Let's clock in.
What is Build a Boo, bro? I mean, like, what is up with that? You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand. What is Build a Boo,
That's
dog?
funny. Build a
Like,
Boo. I actually have seen it before, so I get the reference. I have not partaken.
Do you don't do every experience to do like a QA test to make sure it's up to the task for the
we do get good feedback on that, although it is certainly one of one, I would say, the Build a Boo experience.
Well, because we know where 2 and 3 go, so we probably don't want to go there.
That's good.
That's the best thing ever. So
Hey, welcome back, everybody. Jeff Frick here, coming to you from Remotely One. That's right, I'm a guest host here for the second time. I'm pretty excited about it with my esteemed host, Kaleem Clarkson. Kaleem, great to see you this morning.
Oh, yeah, man. Jeff, thank you so much, sir, for stepping in for our brother and Rick. While Rick, get better, sir. Get your back better. But I'm so excited to have you on, man. We got a professional. Shout out to you and your podcast, Work 20XX. So check that out, listeners and viewers, because it's damn good. So love it, man. Thank you for being on, bro. Thank you.
My pleasure. But today is all about Remotely One. So if you have been watching Remotely One, you like the show, go to ratethispodcast.com/remotely one and please leave a review. Just one more time. So you got that, ratethispodcast.com, one word, /remotely one. If you did that, that would be terrific. Since 2015, Rick and Kaleem have built an amazing community of remote professionals, over 3,000 Slack members, which is amazing, 5,000 email subscribers. It's free. Check it out at remotelyone.com. So, Kaleem, over to you. Tell us a little bit about our guest.
Oh, Jeff, you know that I get real nerved up. I get so nerved up with our guests, Jeff, because they just make me understand how little I am and how lack of productivity that I have. In addition, I have to wear these special shirts. I wear these special shirts, Jeff, that have like maxi pads underneath them so that I don't sweat. Through my shirt. So I don't mind. So today's guest is no different, Jeff. Today's guest, they are originally from Charlotte, North Carolina, the Queen City. Okay, Charlotte. And they currently reside in the city, aka New York City. Let's see, what else do we have? Oh, here we go. This is the beginning of me feeling, incompetent. Our guest today, Jeff, graduated from Vanderbilt. So they know.
Call that the Stanford of the SEC, or the Northwestern of the SEC.
I think that might be Duke, but yeah.
Isn't it called the Hidden Ivy League? Or is it a part of the Southern Ivy League, actually? He studied economics.
They still have to play Alabama in football, though. It's rough.
That is true. Oh, our guests started off some of their professional career with a friend of ours from the show, Rob Sato at Scoop Technologies and the Flex Index. Shout out to Rob. Rob, what's up, man? How you doing?
Kicking tail with the Flex Index.
Something most people don't know about our guest, Jeff. He has a twin brother. But he says he has a dad bod. But brother, I have a dad bod. It's okay, bro. Dad bods are cool. It's cool. It's the new coolness, man. He has a twin brother. Our guest plays the piano and an instrument, which is an Indian drum called the tabla. Really interesting. So maybe
you played that before?
No. Played a guitar. Never played the tabla. Maybe you could teach me. Oh, and our guest, they went to Burning Man last year, aka Burning Mud guest. Did you have to throw your muddy clothes away?
Definitely a portion of that. Yeah, definitely.
Them shits are in the dirt. They're in the trash. Oh, that's so awesome that you went. I got to get out there one year. Let's see. So something else about our guest. Our guest was a senior associate consultant at this tiny little firm, Jeff. This company's called Bain Company. No big deal. Just one of the big three. And the big three, what's that? McKinsey. What's the other one? Boston Consulting Group and Bain Company. So again, Jeff, what the hell am I doing with my life, Jeff? What are we doing?
Something in the water.
I know. I guess know some shits. Then he just decides to just say, I'm gonna bolt. I'm good. Then they decide I'm gonna get into the other side of the startup business, the VC world. Decides to become an investor, an advisor in the Bay Area, just doing big things, Jeff. Just doing big things. And then last but not least, our guest, they are the co-founder and CEO of Marco Experiences, which is a platform that helps companies plan their offsites and retreats. So listeners and viewers, please give a warm welcome to Suman Siva! Let's go! Woo! Let's go, baby. Settle down, studio audience. Just
Give
settle
that
down.
man a new shirt.
Ooh, studio audience, please chill. Sorry about that, Suman. Our studio audience gets fired up. Sorry about that. Thank you for joining us, man. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Love the energy, Kaleem. You're coming in hot on a Friday morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. So,
yeah, we got to do it, man. Got to do it. Thank you.
Greatest intros in the biz. That's certainly for sure.
yeah.
Suman, let's jump into it. So you were clipping along at Bain, doing smart things with smart people and big companies. And then suddenly you decided to take a slight detour and join our friend Rob, as Kaleem mentioned, over at the Flex Index. How did you decide to leave the big world in the big business and get your toe wet in the startup world?
Yeah, actually, so Rob used to work at Bain as well. And so I was working at Bain doing consulting, and I was working at Walmart, which is biggest company, massive company. And I kind of always had this kind of desire to go work at a startup. This is, by the way, this is pre-Flex Index. Rob Scoop was initially a B2B carpooling product. So they help companies with mobility. And so basically, I think it was like 10 people in San Francisco. So whenever that's kind of my first taste of where I guess you live, Palo Alto. Now Jeff, but moved over to SF and was there kind of helping his chief of staff, everything from, building out their financial plan to moving plants and moving offices for Rob. And so he's still an advisor at Marco, actually. So I've had the pleasure to kind of keep in touch with him over the years. And obviously he's now a top LinkedIn influencer in the future of work. And he's done a lot of amazing things with regards to kind of like building out the Flex Index. And we can talk more about that. But yeah, that's how I initially got linked up with Rob.
That's really cool, man. So I need to just go back to when you and Rob were at Bain & Company. So we've had a few people on the show that have been at either McKinsey or any of the other big three consulting firms. What was that experience like, first off? Oh, do you remember your interview question? That's the first question. Do you remember your interview question by any chance?
Yeah.
And then number two, like, what is that experience like? And like, what did you really take from the consulting experience as far as education?
Yeah, I think consulting, it's one of those things, it's like, there's actually memes about this. It's kind of, people don't even know what the job means, right? It's like, what does a consultant do? And I think there's truth to that, but I think one thing about consulting is you kind of learn how to think and solve problems, essentially. Going to your question, like the way you interview for consulting firms is like a case study. So essentially it's like, hey, there's this business problem, and what they're kind of testing for is like, do you have structured thinking? Can you kind of like figure out from first principles, like how to, solve a problem, which I would say Rob is phenomenal at. I don't remember the first interview question, but I remember the guy that interviewed me was one of the most fascinating guys, this guy, Nick Padlow. And he was an Army Ranger, and he was also went to Stanford for business school, but he was a professional poker player as well. And he was like a weird, eccentric, super smart, charismatic guy. And we just like hit it off. I don't know. There's certain interviews you do, and you're like, this kind of clicked. And so I still remember he actually went on to become an entrepreneur and do a bunch of interesting kind of things. But I remember the person who interviewed me, not necessarily the question itself, but.
Okay, so he didn't ask you how many tennis balls fit in a plane or some dumbass shit like
Exactly.
that. You didn't get any dumbass
How many manhole covers in Manhattan?
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. Great.
And then you're with Rob for a while, but then you left and you went down another kind of traditional course, which is on the investment side, and you jumped over into the investment and even got to spend some time at SoftBank Vision Fund, which at that
What?
time is one of the biggest, most important investors out there in the tech space. So what did you learn kind of in your time on the investment
Unbelievable.
side?
Unbelievable.
Yeah, so I initially started off at a firm called Castanea. Now it's called Stride. And they're a consumer. Basically, I love brands. Whether that
Mm.
we obviously focus on businesses B2B now, but they were the former Neiman Marcus family office, so invested in brands, fashion, food and beverage, beauty, that sort of thing. So I love kind of brands and kind of brand equity, which is something important to kind of Marco now. And then basically, I was like, all right, I want to go into tech in some capacity. So I was working in consumer. I went over to SoftBank and joined kind of pretty early. I was one of the first 20 folks on the investment team working on the consumer technology and prop tech or real estate tech group. And so SoftBank was, I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that, to be honest, right? It was a $100 billion firm. The initial year was like, could have been, I mean, I actually joked that there should be kind of a movie about this, but you go there, it was like 20 people. We got a ton of money to deploy. And the first year was, just really, I would say, getting a lot of exposure to some of the most interesting people in Silicon Valley and just being a super young person, but because of the fund, you got tremendous access. So meeting incredible founders who were creating kind of category defining companies. And to be honest, a lot of what I found there was, I was like, it looks like people on the other side of the table are doing more interesting work. I think the venture ecosystem is super important and capital is important. And obviously SoftBank made some good investments, made some wild investments. And I think Masa was probably ahead of his time in terms of thinking about the importance of AI, which is obviously super relevant now. But he was always talking about kind of the importance of AI as an investor in NVIDIA, ARM. And so basically, I didn't know what I was doing. And I was at SoftBank and I was like, all right, I want to go start this company. And I was working in consumer tech, spent a lot of time within travel and experiences as kind of a category, invested in a company called Get Your Guide, which is the competitor to TripAdvisor. It's an experiences platform. It's kind of like, all right, I want to go do something in this space. Didn't have a co-founder at the time, didn't have really much of anything. And so went out. Luckily, I was in San Francisco, so I was able to meet Nick, my co-founder, and start working on Markham. So
Interesting. So just out of curiosity, before you started your company, and we'll talk about that in a second, what was your initial spark that got you involved with remote work? What was your first remote work experience like? Do you remember?
Well, what's funny is we started Marco right before COVID. So initially it wasn't focused on remote work, but it was focused on experiences, right? So it was actually consumer facing. And then I remember COVID happens and Nick, my co-founder, were in Tahoe actually. And we were like, all the ski resorts start shutting down and no one really knew what was going to happen. It's like, is this going to be a weekend thing? Is this going to be a couple of weeks?
Right.
Is this going to be what happens in a couple of years? And I don't think anyone foresaw that the way we live and work would just fundamentally change overnight. Like even the fact that we're doing this podcast recording super normally over Zoom or Riverside or whatever platform, that's not normal. And now 80% of companies are remote or hybrid, and the way we work has kind of fundamentally changed. What happened actually, and then the reason for kind of pivoting Marco is we were trying to back to square one, figuring out what we're going to do. And we started doing virtual events to support kind of creators, hosts in the local kind of community. And we just basically had a text list and if you remember, we're so bored that they would really do anything. So we were just doing these events, and there's a couple of funny stories from that period. But someone worked at an old school tech company. I forget. It was Oracle or something or Cisco. And they were like, hey, our team hasn't seen each other. Would you do this? Would you do this for our team? And we're like, oh, that's interesting. They're like, yeah, we're just on Zoom all day. We don't get to kind of do anything social or kind of engage with one another. So then we kind of started doing this. We had a PDF with basically 10 hosts that you could just kind of book, and a lot of companies leaned in and they were like, okay, we need some way to connect our employees. So that was the first experience of people kind of asking for some way to connect.
It's pretty interesting. Brian Elliott from the Future Forum, one of his great lines is remote doesn't mean never together. And, it's even more important and more intentional that the time you are together, you're spending time building trust and building relationships and strengthening the team and move all your crap work to async. But I'm curious, everyone was kind of struggling in those early COVID days. They were doing Zoom meetings and Zoom cocktails and Zoom happy hours and Zoom family days. How did you start to think about experiences first digitally, and then I don't know, just say we have to get to people together. Obviously, there were the restrictions, so together still wasn't an option in early COVID. How did it kind of evolve into to more than just getting together on a Zoom call?
Totally. And so, Brian, for Marco, we do a webinar talk called Turning Companies into Communities. He's been a guest on there with Chrissy Arnold, who, when he was at Slack, you're familiar with this, something called the Future Forum. They're publishing a bunch of like amazing research around remote work and how to collaborate more effectively. Obviously, Slack is one of the, we live in Slack. It's an amazing collaboration tool. However, both of them will talk about how, as you said, Jeff, remote doesn't mean never together, right? So I think philosophically, human beings are just like social creatures. So, Kaleem, we met at an event. We met at HR Transform, right? Mm-hmm. And I actually think that meeting and developing kind of empathy and kind of just like making friends, honestly, with folks that you work with, or developing some like common understanding just allows you to do better work. Like I always say that transactional work, or just like the productivity of work, is a lot easier now. You have so many tools that are collaborative, whether it's like Notion or Slack or whatever it is, to like get your work done more effectively. But if I'm working with you on something and I don't know where you're coming from, I don't know if you have a family or kids, or like what's stressing you out on a personal level, or just like don't have that empathy, I don't just think there's a lot of data that supports this. You're not going to be as good. Your work isn't going to be as good, right?
Yeah.
So that is philosophically, I think, something that's super important. And then I would say, like at the beginning of COVID, the only way you could get together was Zoom, right? Yes. And our company has pivoted and focused on group travel, kind of on-sites, off-sites, retreats. And the reason for that, and Annie Dean and Atlassian do a lot of like great research on this that folks have all kind of seen in the space around, they've measured the impact of kind of, say you're doing a quarterly gathering or something like that, your scores of employee connection improve by 30, 40%, and then they go down after time. But those moments are like super important, and you can tie that to productivity. It's not just employee connection, but there's actually like business outcomes that come out of that. So long-winded answer, but
yeah, I mean, it was a good answer. It was a good answer. And it actually made me think about, so if I'm getting the timelines correct, you started Marco Experiences as a company that did like in-person events before the pandemic started, right? Is that accurate, or is that accurate?
We basically started Marco as, there's a company called Partyful, or you may know Luma, which is like basically like a Facebook events, like super lightweight text-based social events product where you can book experiences on a marketplace as well. That was like the initial kind of thing. So it's always been called Marco, and it's always been around kind of the, I would say, like experiences kind of space.
Yeah.
And then it was kind of like virtual, and then in person. Yeah.
Like, because you're all ready to go, and then all of a sudden there's a thing. So then you had to kind of transition, and now you're kind of back to being able to help people plan their experiences in person.
Yeah.
My question is kind of back to connection again. I know I talk about this all the time, so people, I'm sorry if you're hearing it again, but shout out to Buffer for doing their state of remote works that they've been doing since like 2016, maybe. I think they've been doing those state of remote works for a while. And in every one, they ask relatively the same questions as far as what are your biggest challenges. And the most recent one, or the 2023 version, when you add up all the challenges, difficulty collaborating, difficulty connecting with my teammates, difficulty with loneliness, when you add up all of these connections, it comes out to about 68%, I think. No, 60% of all of the challenges that people have are around connection. Like literally, like those are their challenges. So as a company that is leading the charge in this space, how much advice do you provide your clients as far as building the week out for those intentional connections? I know a lot of people plan these offsites and load them up with work. And shout out to Chase Warrenting. He's talked a lot about this with Duis as far as what their percentages are of work versus fun. So what type of assistance do you provide, organizations, especially remote or hybrid organizations, to really be intentional about the connection side of it?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. So I think we always talk about like intentional experiences at Marco. And the way I describe it is in some ways, you're kind of in this like long distance relationship with folks that, by the way, even if you're remote or hybrid or in person now, a lot of companies have different hubs. So you might be on a sales team and you're actually working with folks that are in different geographies. So you're actually, even if you wouldn't be qualified as a remote company, everyone has,
You could be fully on site. You could be fully on site and in different locations is your point. You could say 100%. We don't allow remote work, but all these people in different hubs, technically they're working remotely.
Yeah, for sure. So there's, from an advice standpoint, we are as much learning from companies that are doing these the right way or kind of learning along the way as much as we are providing advice. Because what I would say is everyone's trying to figure it out. And we're in this period where companies are just starting to develop, during COVID, no one could see each other. Now there's a period of experimentation where people are like, okay, cool, we're going to invest in kind of these kind of gatherings. And now you have like companies like Atlassian and Dropbox that are developing strategies around like frequency, cadence, format, right? Whether it's like, okay, cool, this is how often we do something with the full company. This is functional level, leadership team level, new hires, and so forth. From a content perspective, it is a classic kind of, the initial kind of reaction will be like, cool, we only see each other, let's jam in a bunch of stuff during these 3 days, which especially you have to think about, some people are introverted, some people are extroverted. Everyone is exhausted and probably has to travel. They may be leaving behind kids and so forth. So then that is actually not the best use of time in terms of just like jamming as much things to do as possible. And Brian, actually, we talked about this when we chatted, but we do something called kind of experience design, where it's like, what is cool? We can book you a hotel, we can handle vendors and so forth. But also there's almost like a psychology aspect around how does we also talk about like the airport test, which is how do you get an employee when they're headed back out of the airport to be like, that was an exceptional use of time. And it actually isn't like a boondoggle where you're just like having a bunch of drinks and having a bunch of fun, but it's also not something where you're just like heads down on your laptop all the time. So there's different ways you can kind of structure and program a time when you're together. And I think it should be based on, it could be, there's obviously like you're staying somewhere, you're eating, you're drinking, there's collaborative work you can do. So there's work around like, hey, I got to build a slide deck or write some code or whatever. You can do that pretty effectively asynchronously, right? Yeah. But what you can't do is maybe having like a product kind of jam session or getting old school whiteboarding, which I still am a kind of big fan of, right? Or delivering some strategic message and getting people excited about something, or doing something around like team connection, which is a very broad phrase, but something that is kind of work related, but it's actually about like understanding how someone shows up at work, what their strengths are, how do you effectively communicate with them? So we basically have a whole platform or product around this where you basically build out an itinerary and there's templates around what you might want to do, how do you structure the time, and it will actually tell you how to do that most effectively. And we have people that will help. So.
Oh, you called it experience design consultants available to help people?
Yeah, so we have, so Court Roberts leads experience design. Nice. She has a background as a facilitator, as a coach, and she'll, and we work with other companies as well if you need to book like a facilitator or session or something like that. But we can also, our big thing at Marco is combining product and technology with like a high level of support, service, and human beings as well. So
kudos, man. Kudos to you, bro. Wow.
So it's interesting. People are always trying to define the right word that describes the relationship between people in the company and the company. And some people will say it's like a family, and, people have a lot of pushback on it's a family, and there's all kinds of different words. Your guys' tagline is turning companies into communities and helping companies bring together. How do you see communities as the right defining characteristic? And what is it about a community that's the right amount of intimacy, but, something short of a family?
Well done.
Yeah, so there's a guy, Chris Shembra, who he's an author, he's a speaker, he's an awesome guy, he's a gratitude expert is what people call him. So he's written a couple of books called Gratitude Through Hard Times, and I think Gratitude and Pasta is another one. So he talks about in his books, he's a big kind of community fan, and he talks about the original word company was from two Latin words, which means come, which means together, and panis, which means bread. So the original word for a company was people coming together to break bread. Then it's translated into people coming together with a shared objective or a mission. Could be, to build a product or a service or whatever it is. But by the way, a professional sports team is a community as well. right?
Ooh.
And their fans are communities as well. You can think about them as customers, right?
Right.
So a community doesn't have to be this like kind of kumbaya family where you're all kind of like friends and that sort of thing.
Yeah, just going to
It
Burning
could
Man.
be,
Yeah, like you would only community going to Burning Man with tents and all that stuff. Yeah, I get it.
well, so no, the reason I went to Burning Man is like, I think Burning Man is one of the most interesting experiments on community that exists in our generation, right? Because if you go there, there's 10 kind of like guidelines. One of them is like leave no trace, for example. So everyone is picking up trash. The whole thing is like, you cannot like leave any trash. So like, you talk about mud, despite all of that. And each camp has their own kind of like guidelines. So you have to like work shifts. You have to contribute. Everyone comes there and is part of the build process. So like, that is also one of the reasons I went is like, that is a super interesting example of a community that comes together and builds a full city in the period of a couple of weeks. So it is a fascinating kind of example. So Mark Levy, who's the head of global employee experience at Airbnb, and he's also an advisor at Marco, at Airbnb, they actually coined the phrase employee experience. And he talks about like 4 types of connection that was important to Airbnb. And I might get some of these wrong, but it's like connection between the company and the employees, to the employees, the employees to the customers, and the employees to the community.
You hit it. I got them written down right here. You nailed it.
So yeah, not to be like a consultant that there's a framework, but like this can relate to any company. Like if you're trying to solve this big problem and you're super high achieving and you're like more kind of hard line, you're like, we got to crush it. That doesn't mean that you don't need that level of connection. The connection could look different, right? But think about a company like OpenAI, which is like absolutely crushing it. They have to think about their community, which is cool. How do we have the leadership of the company kind of deliver the message that employees are working on? How do employees work together cohesively? How are they going out and selling to customers? And how do we get people to like, in the broader community kind of come along with the vision? So it doesn't matter what company you're in. If you're just like, this doesn't matter, we don't have to invest in kind of connection, that doesn't make any sense to me personally. But
community connection. I love that. That's one thing, I'm working with a client where we're trying to move away from family as business term, because you can't really, I guess you could fire your family, but really you can't, I guess. So yeah, we're trying to step away from that. I think one of the things that we're kind of leaning into is if you are going to use family, maybe say family first or people first, right? Like, but I really love your tagline to, transitioning to communities, because it really is community. If you really think about it, you're all getting together. Communities, people all coming together for a common thing, and then you're moving it forward. So I really love that phrase, man.
Also, like you spend like 70% of your life at work. So some like I forget the exact amount of time or hours, but you spend a tremendous of your life at time like waking hours at work. So you don't have to necessarily like the people you work with and want to go for dinner or drinks afterwards. By the way, I think that's a good thing, right? It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. You might as well, like, my thing is like, I might as well, I don't have to be best friends with everyone at work. I'm that's not true, but I have plenty of great friendships that I've built at work, but you do have to respect each other, right? In order to do good work. And so that's, I think, a non-negotiable, but.
So I'm curious on your feedback forums, what is the thing when they're going to the airport that they say was the most impactful thing of the week? I think of Brian when he talks about his offsites with his teams. He talks about the cooking and making meals together and the spending time. Is there, 2 or 3 things that are just consistent winners in bringing people together and building that sense of belonging?
Yeah, I think it's all a means to an end. So you could do something that's like really fun, but then the objective of that is to share some type of moment with someone, right? That could be work related too. You're solving a really complicated problem, right? Some of the most effective offsites, even for our personal team, is we're coming together and we do like kind of product ideation sessions with our team and bring in cross-functional folks so they can create something that then we'll go build. That has been kind of people get super excited about that. But anything, I would say the biggest impact is like you meet someone new, you share like an authentic kind of experience with them. Brian talks about this too, by the way. I think Zillow CharterWorks just published this, where the natural inclination of someone, if you're with a big group, you're going to like, and you're friends with Kaleem, when you go to these types of things, you're going to hang out.
You're going to click up.
You're
going to click up.
Yeah. So then ways to kind of like create kind of structured serendipity where it's like you actually interact with someone, you're on the sales team and you're talking to someone on the engineering team. That is great. And we just did a webinar on cross-functional collaboration. And one of the great things is we had Weller, who's a senior engineer at Marco, Hannah, who's on the product operations team, and then Allie Brown, who's on the supply team. And they work super well together. They're collaborating super well. But all of that, like Hannah actually met Weller at one of these offsites that we did, developed a friendship with him. He's a Brazilian, so he used to not be super confident going and like just chatting with someone because English isn't his kind of first language. And now they're working super well together. So that actually manifests in like business results because now they're working together and they're friendly and it's going super well. So
I love that. Structured connection is really important. It's something that we've always been a fan of because you're right. I've mentioned this before, but there's a book, I might get the title wrong, but like, why are all the black kids sitting at the one table? And that basically it's very similar, right? Like, you know what you know, and you kind of gravitate towards the people that you have some sort of relationship with. I do want to kind of ask you your opinion. I have a feeling how you're going to answer, but I got to ask you anyway. So at Blend, we talk a lot about connection because, again, that's 60% of the challenges that companies have around connections. So, as we're consulting with them and helping them improve their employee experience, that's a big challenge. So we kind of coined this concept of, creating a social connection strategy. This idea that you have, we kind of group these connections into three big buckets. You have professional connections, mentors, colleagues, coworkers, etc. You have lifestyle connections, which are hobbies, things, friendships that you do. And then intimate connections, which, people get a little weary of a little bit when you're talking about
intimate, but yeah.
intimate connections, right? So romantic relationships, religion's an intimate relationship, politics is an intimate relationship, but they are there, right? What do you think the role is of the organization and the company, especially in a remote company specifically, right? What do you think the role is for a company to ensure that their employees have these connections? And does Marco Experiences provide opportunities for people to kind of learn about the culture of a community, right? Learn about these other things just outside of work, because everybody's focused on how can I just know my coworkers? What about those other connections?
Well, I would say we don't just focus on social connections, and I'll answer your question, but my kind of thing is like, even just to take a step back, if you're remote or hybrid or in office, we also are kind of like ambivalent towards that, because the whole reason you have office space in the first place, by the way, is so your employees connect. Like, so
we forgot about that.
No, so like we did this whole thing on like the ROI of like gatherings, and what the analysis shows is companies on an average spend, like, especially in the Bay Area, maybe 1.5 to 3K per employee per month on rent, furniture, consumables, all the stuff that's like associated with an office. Now you're spending less. And so, because people are like, well, should I really be investing in this? Like, people are investing more in team travel. But the reason is like, by the way, on the net, you're probably saving money, right? So you got to think about your budget and your ROI on like this spend. Ultimately, one of the big reasons you spend on this kind of stuff is to connect. Like, that is literally why you pay for office space, actually, right? So you can be in the same place and be with people and begin work done and so forth. So for Marco, like, it could be work related, right? Like, we do plenty of things where it's like a sales kickoff or a leadership team offsite, which is like, that could be super work related from a connection standpoint. However, even within that container, you're like, cool, there should be, to your point, different types of kind of connection. I think that's really up to the company, to be honest. Like, you could, like, you think about Brian Armstrong at Coinbase, he's like, we're not talking about politics or kind of religion or these types of issues within the workplace. I actually kind of probably am on towards that side of the coin in terms of like, the workplace shouldn't necessarily be a conduit to like talk about politics or something that like, actually you should have a place. And the reason is like, you should have a company where people are allowed to have different points of view, I think, right?
Of course.
I think there definitely is value from a just culture and education standpoint to do things around celebrating each other's history and culture and so forth. That's a positive, right? Because that is more just like celebration and allowing you to like show up as your true self within work, which is a big part of your life, right? So that stuff's great, right? Like, and there's no negative thing to celebrating Black History Month or I'm Indian, like bringing Indian food to the it's like, that's great, right? Because that's a part of, your identity and you should be able to share that. I guess to answer your question, I think a company should be able to decide what that looks like, right?
Makes sense.
And there are a certain minimum viable kind of like you should invest in social connection because there actually are business outcomes that come out of that. Because like there's a Harvard Business School did this paper where your retention and your productivity and all these factors are like way more likely to be high if you have a best friend at work, right?
Yeah.
So if someone's like, well, I don't actually give a shit. Like, why do you need to be friends with people at work?
Seven times more engagement, I think, is the stat. I use that in my slides. It's 7 times more engagement if you have a best friend at work. It's crazy.
Yeah. So we talk to like people leaders, but also finance teams, like CFO. They're like, okay, well, I'm going to do this. And I'm like, cool. Well, there's actually a lot of business value to like investing thoughtfully in these types of things. Like Bain, for example, is always like Glassdoor, best place to work, all this kind of stuff. The first thing you do at Bain is you go to something called Associate Consultant Training, ACT. It's always in Cape Cod and it's global. So Bain has a ton of different offices. I didn't work directly with Rob. He was in the New York office. I was in the Texas office. But I have developed friendships, relationships, been in weddings, invested in, had people invest in my company that I met at Bain. So It is like that's, and by the way, like then
new hire cohorts are critical. Yes.
Yeah. But then you think about like, oh, I invested in this stuff. It's like, now I'll talk about Bain during this podcast. And people are like, oh, interesting. I'm a college person. I'm thinking about going to work at a consulting firm. So you develop a certain affinity. And if you're like an executive down the road and you're like, I got to hire a consultant and you enjoyed your time there, who are you going to choose? You're going to choose that firm, right? Yeah. So it's short-sighted to, I mean, every company should decide, but you should think about kind of that stuff and figure out the right balance for your company.
Makes sense.
All right, so we're getting towards the end of our time. So we have the hard question for you. Tell us what comical or inspiring moment you had while working remotely.
Yeah. So the first time I was working remotely was when I was working on Marco, right? So it's actually funny because this is for an event we were doing for Bain. And so initially when you're starting a startup, you got to be willing to look like an idiot. And in this case, I look like an idiot. But so I remember we basically were doing these like cooking classes. And I was like working to like manually ship these kits with this, like the chef who she basically didn't have it dialed in terms of like shipping food kits. So then I'm working with this junior person at Bain, and it's actually the head of the technology practice at Bain, all these like senior partners. And then we basically ship them meat and it gets spoiled. And then I'm like, oh crap. And then I'm getting this woman that I was working with was like, Suman, like this is terrible. Like what's happening? And I was like, I'm going to like Instacart everyone food. They're like, we don't want any more of this spoiled meat. You got it. They were like, let's just do a cocktail making class. So then I hit up Kate and I'm like, this is a disaster. This is actually a funny story. So
how many people, how many kits were you sending out?
This is like 15, 20 kits or something like that.
So just they open the kits and it's spoiled meat.
Just rotten turkey.
The meat is just, okay, yeah. So by the way, just to be extremely clear, now we vet our hosts and for any of these experiences, people have figured out the shipping thing. So let's just make that super clear.
Yes.
So then I call Kate and I'm like, we got to like just do this cocktail making class. I don't know. We'll figure it out. She responds and she's like, I met her father had a construction site in San Francisco. She had thrown out her back at the construction site that day. Oh, no. So she's like, I can't like move or walk. So I just grab everything in my apartment, like all the booze and the utensils I have. And I was like, I'm going to go to her restaurant. And I am not a mixologist. I was like, I'm going to do this class. I think I'll figure it out. So we had this.
So people
keep
are
it simple:
upset.
gin and tonic.
Yeah. Exactly. So then we had this guy on our Kevin Blake, who's a magician, and he made like he made a ton of money on our platform during COVID. He's an exceptional magician. It sounds kind of kitschy, but he's like badass. Like So I called him and I was like, hey man, I need a favor. Like we have this event and like we can't do it. Are you available? I was like, when is it? I'm like, it's in like 15 minutes. And he was like, okay, I'm going to go to my studio. And so then I get to the thing and I turn on the Zoom and I was like, so this is all part of the experience. You thought you were doing a cooking class, you're doing a magic show. And here we have Kevin Blake and he gets on and he crushes it.
Well, what did you do with the drinks? What did you do with the drinks? Because you grabbed.
I had to have a drink after that experience. So I made my own drink because
That's the best story. That's one of the best stories.
I have like 10 stories. I have
Oh
like
my
10
gosh.
similar stories.
Oh my
They didn't even know about the mixology chapter. That just kind of slipped in and out before they even got involved in the party.
No one really knows about this story. Yeah. So I was sweating bullets. I'm like,
Of course.
oh my God. And then the partners like bringing their kids in. They're like, this is so cool. But man, that was a stressful experience for sure.
Your former company. Wow. What a story, bro. Thank you for sharing that.
Lemonade out of lemons. I love it.
Yeah.
Well done.
It worked out. It could have. I mean, could you imagine if Kevin wouldn't? That would have been a disaster.
Well, you had the drinks ready to go. So
Yeah.
you could have.
It would have been, Jeff, it would have been, here's how you make a gin and tonic. You put some gin, you put some.
Yeah. Well, imagine all 10 of them ate the turkey and got sick after the fact. I mean, there's all kinds of
well
crazy
done.
bad things that could have happened.
Well, you figured it out. Got to pivot.
Yeah.
That's why I tell people dancing is important. You got to learn to dance. You got to be comfortable.
Improv. Yeah.
Stuff changes. All right. So where can people find you? Where can they reach out? Where can they learn more about Marco Experiences?
Yeah, you can go to marcoexperiences.com first and foremost. I'm active on LinkedIn, so you can search Suman Siva, Suman Siva, Siva on LinkedIn, Twitter, all the things. But yeah, check us out at marcoexperiences.com. We help companies save time, money, make their group experiences, offsites, onsites better, more effective. So hit us up, and appreciate the time, guys. This was fun.
Oh man, thank you so much, bro. We'll definitely make it out to one of those experiences. I want to check it out. So I appreciate you coming on the show.
The turkey one. We got a turkey one coming up right after.
I'm bringing a deck of cards.
Suman, thank you so much. We'll talk to you all soon. Peace.
You've been listening to Remotely One. Visit us at remotely1.com/podcast for upcoming episodes. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and download our episodes on your favorite podcast app.
Hey, don't forget to clock out.